launch for the ferry boat companies, Varlac Ventures, Inc. and Transportation Services, Inc. Mr. Hearing Examiner, maybe I'll sign off and log back in to see what's going on with my echo.
Sure. We'll go through with the introductions.
Okay.
Janae Reynolds, Legal Support Specialist from the PSC.
Good morning, or good afternoon. All right, Executive Director, do you want to give some brief remarks?
I do, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining the Public Services Commission on this Zoom platform. My name is Sandra Satori, and I'm the Executive Director of the Virgin Islands Public Services Commission. Joining us today, as you've heard so far, is our Public Services Commission staff, also representatives of the franchised ferry companies. This is the scheduled closing conference for the rate investigation involving the jointly franchised ferry companies, Varlac Ventures and Transportation Services of St. John under PSC docket number 691. Pursuant to the Commission's statutory mandate, rate investigations of the regulated utilities are conducted every 5 years. The companies here were granted franchise agreements by the government of the Virgin Islands, and under applicable law, the Public Services Commission is mandated to conduct periodic rate reviews of the regulated entities and instrumentalities. So the purpose of this investigation is to ensure that the ferry rates remain just, reasonable, and in the best interest of the ratepayers, while also preserving the financial stability of our franchised operators and ensuring full compliance with all regulatory requirements. The hearing examiner presides over this proceeding and oversees all investigative procedures and developments throughout the course of the investigation and its progression. And this is in order to ensure a fair, transparent, and equitable process. And so I thank you again for joining us. And at this point, I'm turning it back over to our hearing examiner, Mr. Jed John Hope.
Thank you, Executive Director Satori. Good afternoon again, and thank you for joining the St. Thomas St. John Ferry Rate Investigation Closing Conference. First, I'd like to say thank you to the ferry companies for joining today and acknowledge that they provide a vital service to the people of the Virgin Islands. And we are all here today to ensure that they continue to provide fair and reliable service to the Virgin Islands community. Before addressing the issues pertaining to the draft report, I need to respond directly to several false statements, mischaracterizations, and personal attacks made by Attorney Maria Hodge during the May 12th hearing. Billing disputes are normal in the course of business and are to be expected. In addition, the nature of this engagement is now somewhat adversarial given the findings of my draft report. And while I do not agree, I can understand the ferry company's current position. If you do not like the findings, you have little strategy remaining other than to challenge the cost of the report that you do not want to pay for. It is not my preference to respond to project matters like this publicly, but since Attorney Hodge chose to address me publicly, I'm compelled to respond publicly as well. It is unfortunate that I was not afforded the opportunity to respond during the hearing itself. Fundamental fairness requires that if one party is given the floor to make accusations and assertions, the other party should be given an equal opportunity to respond. Many people may have interpreted Attorney Hodge's statements as factual, despite the fact that they were riddled with lies, inaccuracies, and mischaracterizations. Facts and context matter. As my mother always said, every story has two sides. First, regarding the hotel expense for the public hearings. Staying on St. John during the first week of February is expensive. The booked room was the cheapest available. That is fact. There was no suite booked. That claim is categorically false and a product of Ms. Hodge's imagination. The lodging arrangement and rate were discussed with and pre-approved by the PSC's executive director prior to the meeting. I even sought the PSC or government rate for the hotel stay. My workday that Monday morning began at approximately 7 a.m. on St. Croix and concluded at around 9 p.m. on St. John, following post-hearing debrief and coordination. Hosting a hearing is much like hosting a dinner party. Everybody else arrives, but the responsibility of ensuring that the presentations, handouts, logistics, coordinations, and proceedings are properly managed falls on the hearing examiner. My team and I worked the entire day, and I did not check into the hotel until after 10 p.m. that night, and I checked out at around 8 p.m. the following morning. Anyone that characterizes that schedule as a vacation is being intentionally dishonest. It is also remarkable that St. John business interests are arguing that I should have stayed overnight on St. Thomas, thus incurring additional travel-related bill time. At a $400 hourly rate, it made little financial sense to leave St. John late at night, ferry back to St. Thomas, and then drive across the island. I would have spent $800 in additional billable time simply getting back to the hotel. It's also a safety issue, given that my day started at 7 a.m. and my team and I were exhausted after the long workday. I maintained that remaining on St. John that evening was the safest, most practical, and cost-effective decision. It is also important to note that there are no legitimate $100 a night hotel rooms in the Virgin Islands, certainly not in February. Comparable accommodations on St. Thomas are roughly $300 a night. Additionally, for the purpose of transparency and cost control, it should also be noted that during the public hearing, 2 SFT Solutions staff members shared a single hotel room in both St. Thomas and St. John in an effort to minimize costs. That decision further reflects a cost-conscious effort made throughout this process to manage costs responsibly while still effectively carrying out the work required by this engagement. Regarding my professional fees, the PSC is receiving a heavily discounted rate. I will also point out that it is an all-inclusive rate that includes others at my firm. Expertise also matters. I'm a chemical engineer and hold an MBA in finance from one of the world's top business schools. I've spent a significant portion of my career at a global consulting firm specializing in matters just like this rate investigation. For example, my team helped establish water rates for the city of Atlanta. Throughout this engagement, that experience and professional network has proven invaluable to the PSC and the Virgin Islands public. It is also important to consider the value of the work performed. The analysis in this proceeding identified approximately $7 million in unwarranted earnings under the existing FAIR framework. Compared with the approximately $150,000 in professional fees incurred thus far, this represents a return of investment of more than 3,400%. Second, there were numerous blatant inaccuracies presented by Ms. Hodge at the public meeting. The statement that there was $80,000 billed in 8 days is categorically false. It is a salacious and misleading statement that I demand Attorney Hodge formally retract. False statements made before the PSC carry consequences, and I am currently reviewing my options with legal counsel regarding those representations. Additionally, I have never rented a vehicle and charged it to this project, contrary to Attorney Hodge's statements. And furthermore, even when providing my own transportation, I do not bill the PSC for my mileage or gas. I own a rental car company and I have access to transportation while in the St. Thomas, St. John district. I have been doing what I can to keep the cost of this engagement down. I repeat, I have never charged a car rental to this project. That is a fact. The billing disputes have become so ridiculous that Attorney Hodge has even objected to the cost of printing copies for the agenda for the public hearing. Third, with respect to the final report, I've worked as a consultant throughout the world for many years, and there's nothing more demanding than starting with a blank piece of paper and preparing a comprehensive final report in a compressed time frame. The report submitted represents extensive and painstaking work. I effectively cleared my schedule for an entire week and focused exclusively on reviewing the evidentiary record, testimony, exhibits, public comments, financial records, statutes, and prior PSC findings in order to produce a complete and defensible report to the Commission. Attorney Hodge argues that this proceeding represents the most expensive ferry study in the PSC history, while simultaneously failing to mention that prior studies were largely ineffective at controlling the bloated rate base and allowing the ferry companies to overcharge the public by $7 million over the last 12 years. Maybe she was expecting a rubber stamping of the requested fares, but instead the PSC has received a thorough and independent review of the merits of the fare increase case presented. Attorney Hodges also failed to mention that this has also been the longest ferry proceeding in PSC history, and that many of the delays were caused by the ferry companies themselves through procedural stalling, incomplete disclosures, and resistance to oversight. The ferry companies have no one to blame but themselves for the cost of this investigation. The engagement was supposed to be completed in September 2025, and the ferry companies and their counsel repeatedly stalled the proceedings. That is a fact. Those delays also necessitated the preparation of an interim report at the request of the PSC, which resulted in additional work and analysis. This hearing also necessitates monthly public meetings, and the longer this process is dragged on, the more it will ultimately cost. It is fundamentally illogical to delay and prolong the project and then complain about the project costs associated with your 10-month delay. The last ferry rate investigation occurred in 2015. The more time that elapsed between investigations, the more years of financial records, operational activity, testimony, filings, and evidentiary material must be reviewed and analyzed. This was not a simple or routine review. Even with that broader scope, the total cost of this proceeding amounts to less than approximately $10,000 per year per ferry company over the last 11 years. That figure must also be viewed in the context of the ferry operators collectively generating about $7 million annually in revenue. Effective regulation comes at a cost, but the cost of no regulation is even greater. Finally, context matters. The 2007 ferry investigation cost approximately $125,000. Adjusted for inflation, that amount would exceed $200,000 today. The current costs are entirely reasonable given the scope, duration, complexity, public engagement, interim reporting requirements, and the approximately $7 million in unwarranted earnings identified during this investigation. At the end of the day, this proceeding is not about the hearing examiner. It's about determining the appropriate rate base and a fair price of ferry service that Virgin Islanders can depend on daily. And that's my job, to ensure that things are fair, balanced, and meaningful oversight and accountability are finally applied to the ferry franchise. No more deflections, no more stalling. Enough with the sideshow, enough with the antics. Stop the gaslighting. It is imperative that we get back to the real matter at hand. I'll take a few quick questions regarding my opening statement, but today's discussion will focus on the finalization of the draft report. Let's proceed.
Well, Mr. Hearing Examiner, I have no questions about your statement, but I do think it's fair to say that it is a further demonstration of bias on the part of the hearing examiner, and we note our objections under the circumstances.
Duly noted. Any other questions on the opening statement? If not, we will move forward.
Please move forward.
All right, thank you. All right, so to the draft report. I am sure that everyone has gotten a chance to take a look at the draft report at this point. We talked about it in the public hearing this week. A few of the recommendations were already adopted, but let me just give everyone on the call a brief overview. I found some serious issues with the way assets were applied to the calculation. We have vessels that have been out of the territory for up to 10 years that are still included in the rate base. We have vessels that are retired, and we also have most notably government-funded assets that the ferry companies were earning a financial return on. The next thing that I want to talk about is the cost of operation. We were not able to hone in on that given the poor data quality as well as the kind of difference amongst, between the submissions. We need to decouple the red hook and the Charlotte Amalie route. We need to focus our efforts on the Red Hook Cruise Bay route because that represents 97% of the ridership. The remaining 3%, goes to the Charlotte Amalie route, and I have to give some thought on how we decouple the fares, and I've got to take a look at the numbers, but that's in play as well. My recommendations overall from a data integrity and oversight requirements is that the ticketing apparatus needs to be independent. At present, the current the ferry companies jointly own the ticketing apparatus, and it makes it impossible to independently verify ridership and revenue. But I also made some recommendations with respect to audit and fuel consumption, payroll, staffing, and things of that nature. But my bottom line recommendation was that the record does not support a rate increase at this time. At the meeting on Tuesday, the commission voted to approve or move forward with 3 recommendations. I believe they were decoupling the Red Hook route, utilizing the 3 government boats primarily, which was another recommendation that I made in the draft report. It allows us to just maximize uptime, and it's a lot cleaner to analyze that. And the final thing was eliminating the return on government assets. So giving those 3 things, as well as as well as the rest of the recommendations, I have to go back, like I said, and take a look at the numbers and put something in front of the commission that they can adopt as far as rates. So that ball is in my court. But I would love to hear from the ferry companies as well as the PSC what objections they have, if any, to my draft report.
So, Mr. Hearing Examiner, the position of the ferry boat companies is that we are reserving all objections to the draft report since it is identified as incomplete and preliminary. We reserve all objections as to errors of law, matters of evidence and fact, and procedural errors until we have your final report.
Okay, well, that's a little different than what we were expecting. We would like all objections to the draft report in writing by May 21st, which is a week from today. And then at that point, I'll finalize the report. So you're saying at this point, you do not wish to comment, and you will comment on the final report.
We're reserving all objections, and we will provide comments to the commission when we have your final report. The one thing I would say is that with regard to the draft report, the comments on the failure to post the copy of the franchise on the vessels, since your visit to the companies, that has been resolved with the posting of a QR code that gives passengers access to the full franchise, as well as a way to file complaints with the commission. Otherwise, we reserve all objections.
Okay. Attorney Spring?
A few comments, if I may. Recognizing these impose additional burdens on this process at this point, one of the recommendations regarded simplification of the rate structure. The testimony of the ferry's expert on this, Mr. Williams, was that in a normal ferry operation, he sees about 4 rate classes. I believe we had 11 or 13 rate classes identified for the ferry system here. I would like to hear if the ferry companies have a position on whether those rates should be simplified or not. And then if so, a recommendation as to what those might be. That would be the first one. And do you want me to stop there, or do you want me to go through the whole list?
No, let's go through them one by one. Attorney Hodge?
I think the companies have made their position on the rate categories clear in the submission, which they provided to the commission and to the hearing examiner, which included specific rate proposals for each category of travelers. And that is our position that those categories are supported by the evidence provided by our expert witness and also consistent with statutory and legal requirements.
Okay. Attorney Spring, next.
I I understand the calculation. At the end of the day, well, let me rephrase that. We certainly hope to have out by tomorrow the three motions that the commission adopted at its hearing in the form of orders tomorrow, which we will clearly share with you and with the ferries as soon as those are completed and signed. In doing so, the revenue requirement, what is the actual amount of revenues that the ferry companies should be anticipating, should be part of the recommendations here.
Agreed.
And one of the questions at that point is, did those revenue requirements match the existing rates, or do the existing rates need to be modified to provide the necessary revenue, either up or down?
Yeah, what I would say is, if we are going to take the government-owned assets out of the calculations, I mean, those are, that is the vast majority of the rate base. Rates will go down. And I think what's going to happen, and I haven't run the math yet, but what's going to happen is the rate base is going to be, very low. And we're going to have to look at some creative ways to make sure that the ferry companies can still make some margin, because I don't think that the margin is there once you take the government assets out of the equation. But contextually, rates are probably going down.
And I would note that the commission staff does not oppose the concept of the ferry companies earning a rate of return on their activities. The measure of the government subsidized boats is probably an inaccurate way to do that.
Correct. They're going to have to earn a return on something, and like I said, I've got to do some work and figure out what that rate of return is and how they earn it. But we have to make sure that they can make some money as well.
Finally, I noted on your schedule we have objections to your report, and we certainly have the draft report in hand. By May 21st, it is certainly not unusual in many of our rate cases to have a final report that includes the report and recommendations and the objections of the parties contained in what makes the final report as a package delivered to the commission. I believe it would be inappropriate to ask the commissioners to not hear any of the objections to that final report until in the public hearing on June 9th. The commission shouldn't be ambushed with those objections or exceptions to the report at that hearing for the first time. So either they need to be included with the report as of May 21st, or we need to have a date set prior to June 9th, where you will have your report ready and the parties will have opportunity to submit in writing their objections or exceptions to the report prior to June 9th.
So I will submit to the hearing examiner and to Attorney Sprain that we fully anticipated submitting objections in writing. Not, however, before there's a final report.
So there's, I really don't want to drag this process out any longer and have another meeting. The point of the objections, as I see them, is for them to be taken under consideration while preparing the final report. But if Attorney Hodge does not want to be a part of that process, I certainly can't force her to do that. I do understand that it would be great for the commissioners to have the final report and the objections in hand. I'm just worried about the timing before, given enough time to finalize a report. The hearing's on June 9th. I have no idea when Attorney Hodge, or if Attorney Hodge is going to submit the questions in writing. I would hate to delay the process any longer.
So there's no reason that our position should delay the preparation of the final report. We've indicated we will submit objections when the final report has been filed. If the final report, if you know when the final report will be ready, and you know when the commission's next meeting, we can see whether it's possible to have objections after the report and before that date. I don't even have a clear understanding of when the hearing examiner expected to have his final report.
Well, that's the thing, right? So, like we're leaving this meeting today. I was hoping for, all the objections within the week. And that would have given me some time to get the report done before the June 9th hearing. But now I have to make sure that I leave enough time for you to review the report and then give you ample time to, formulate your objections and get that to the commission in advance of them preparing for the hearing. Do you
But I
see
would
it?
have had to do that anyway, Mr. Hearing Examiner, because
No,
even
they
if
would.
even if we told you what our objections were now, when you prepared your final report, if we still had objections, obviously we would be submitting them to the commission. So there has to be a time lapse between final report and the commission action that gives us an opportunity to object to the final report.
Yeah, I don't really want to go back and forth. What I would say is that the more time, the better, to prepare the final report. And obviously we want to give the commissioners enough time to review the report and the objections. Like Attorney Sprain, we don't want to drop it on them at, a day or two before the meeting. So I don't know if that is possible given what you're proposing, but I guess that's an issue, that's a larger issue for the commission. So I will do my best to get the final report to you guys within the next couple weeks. I know that June 9th is the hearing, and we'll see if there's enough time for Attorney Hodge to, to digest the report and get her, her comments back to the commission before the hearing.
Understood.
Any views? Well, Attorney Hodge,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
sorry. Are you guys frozen? Okay. All right.
I'm seeing you.
Attorney Sprain, is there anything else?
No, I did not have anything else I wanted to bring up at this time. Thank you.
Okay. I think that is I think that's all. Public comments. Is there anyone on the line that would like to jump in and offer some public comments? While the go ahead.
But may I make an exception? I did fail to make one comment earlier. I did see a news source regarding this hearing, which commented that this was a final hearing on the rates, and of course, it is not. The
It's
final
not.
hearing on the rates will be before the commission, which is
Correct.
currently scheduled for June 9th. This is the
Correct.
final conference of the hearing examiner process and the submission preparation of the report and the objections, which will be before the commission. The rates are not being finalized today.
Thank you for clarifying. All right, at this point, I'd like to open up to the public for any questions, comments, or thoughts on the proceeding.
Hi, Mr. John Hope. This is Judy Torres, the Chief of Staff for Senator at Large, Angel Bocas Jr.
Hey, good afternoon, Judy. How
Good
you doing?
afternoon. Good afternoon. Is there any way that we could get a copy of the report as well once it's completed?
I don't see why not. I don't see why not. So
Oh, perfect.
I
How
will-
can we get a copy of it?
I will be happy to send it to you, but we will put it up on the commission's website as soon as it's available. But we will
Okay.
send a copy to your offices.
Please. And you said in the next few weeks it should be available, correct?
correct.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, that is all we had prepared. Thanked everyone for participating today in the closing conference. Like I said, it is now in my court to finalize the draft report over the course of the next couple of weeks. At that point, I will get it over to the commission for posting and distribution. And we will go from there. The hearing on this issue is on June 9th. And I'm sure that those details will be circulated by the PSC. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All over?
Over.